Welcome to Fossils and Fiction, the podcast where we explore the culture and science of paleontology. I'm media researcher and dino geek Travis Holland.
And I'm paleontologist and weird bug enthusiast Alyssa Fjeld. Each episode, we uncover the incredible stories behind fossils and meet the people who study them, create art inspired by them, and bring prehistory to life.
Today on Fossils and Fiction, we're going to get a little mad and we're going to get a little nostalgic. I hope you'll join us for it. But first, hi Alyssa.
How's your week going?
Yeah, not too bad. A bit of a heat wave in southeastern Australia following the cyclone up north. So the weather is going great for everybody here at the moment.
I'm not loving it because it is hot and sweaty in Melbourne, but my cat is thriving, as is this succulent that I picked up, which is located inside a little sauropod planter.
It's awesome. So
Named him
cute.
Bradward. He's a friend.
Bradward?
Bradward, yes.
Great name. Great name. Look, instead of the news this week, which covers a kind of piece of paleo news or research, I thought that it's probably not a good idea to let this episode pass without mentioning what's happening in the US with the dismantling of science funding, with attacks on universities. And unfortunately, it's not actually unique to the US. There are lots of European countries undergoing university defunding at the moment. And it's also something we've seen in Australia in recent years. So let's be really clear about, I think, where we stand as a podcast on this. Science is important. We need to defend and support the creation of knowledge, especially about the natural world and the impact that humans are having on it.
It's incredibly important even now to focus on making sure that both the people that live on the lands that we're trying to protect and the young people coming up in our society understand the world around them. Science is part of that program, and thankfully, there have been a couple of pushbacks against legislative changes in the U.S. One of the most important recently was the Stand Up for Science campaign, which held marches across the U.S. on the 7th of March. Hopefully, Stand Up for Science will continue to promote different pushback efforts, and we've also seen quite a few people calling for petitions and things like that, especially through major organizations like the Society for Vertebrate Paleontology. I would also like to say that in spite of some of the issues that, for example, South Australia Museum had in recent years, right now, things are going pretty well in Australia, and thankfully, most of the defunding has not reached us yet. In fact, Museums Victoria recently hired someone for a research assistant position in the paleontological collections. So I would say that if you're out there and you're feeling a little bit despondent about what's going on, we're with you. And there are some things that are working to change this and places you can still go if paleontology is for you. Come join me in Australia. You won't be the only American here.
And of course, if people have advice about surviving and thriving in science, despite some of the challenges facing the field, all fields really of endeavour at the moment, we're really happy to hear it.
Yeah, if you know of someone that's working to make change in our environment, let us know.
Absolutely. We'd love to profile them and their work. Now, I said we were going to get mad and we were going to get nostalgic. So our feature segment this week is going to be about Dinotopia. This is a book series that I grew up absolutely loving, something I don't think I told you previously, Alyssa, but I have attempted to build Dinotopia in Lego a couple of times, and
Oh my God.
what I kind of ended up resulting with was a build called Serpentine City instead, which kind of had two cliffs on either side with kind of dragons and stuff. I didn't go with the Dinotopia theme just because I didn't feel like I was getting it right. But there are a couple of settings in Dinotopia which we'll come to that have just stuck with me my entire life, which is Waterfall City and the canyon, which the name escapes me now, of course, but the canyon where they train the Skybacks and the Skybacks riders. It's just such a cool book series.
I don't think there's anything that I've encountered in the modern day that is quite like it. It is a very unique illustrated series of children's books that came out in the 2000s, but it spawned an awful lot of other media. It's a take on this setting that most people today would not otherwise be familiar with. And it's this lovingly illustrated, so the primary driver of it was an illustrator, and I got this book when I was a kid as well, and I remember being obsessed with it, trying to always convince my parents to let me go out and buy jewelry and components of outfits that would fit in right at home in Dinotopia. That's how I got this bracelet. And yeah, just the amount of detail in the books is so stunning that you can just stare at them for hours. They're incredibly engaging.
I think you're right. There was this kind of style of producing particularly children's books, which was just beautifully animated in the kind of 90s, 2000s, where they were large format prints. And another one was Animalia, which I really loved as well. I don't know if you've ever had that one, but they were large format prints that just had beautiful drawings, beautifully illustrated animals in particular and landscapes. And so that's what Dinotopia really was all about. It was kind of driven by these visuals as much as anything. James Gurney is the writer and author, and he's still very active on Instagram. I follow James on Instagram, worth a follow. He first wrote or released the first Dinotopia, A Land Apart from Time, in 1992. And for anyone who hasn't encountered it, what happened in Dinotopia is it's this kind of hybrid fantasy adventure story where these characters, Arthur Dennison and his son, who are kind of Victorian era explorers, get shipwrecked on this uncharted island. And what they find is a human dinosaur peaceful coexistence. So it's a kind of lost world. It follows on from Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost World, and similar in themes to Gulliver's Travels, where you kind of boys' own adventures in some ways. You get out into the world and find a part of the world that is unknown or unexplored. It's, as you say, it's driven by these illustrations. Also driven, I think, by illustrations from real adventures. Like it draws inspiration from those as well. So,
Right.
and it became a bestseller. There was a whole series of sequels. I think there's like 20 plus books. There's a TV adaptations. There's even made for television films. Huge fan base, and obviously it fits right in our millennial wheelhouse.
It's
So
funny,
when
isn't
did you
it?
first encounter Dinotopia? Tell me about your memories.
I think I was given it by a favorite aunt who gave me a lot of books like this growing up. As a kid, all of my family are big nerds, so I would get things like The Neverending Story, the VHS copy, which tells you how old I am. I would get those things for Christmas, and I remember getting this. My dad is a huge reader of old science fiction, and we're talking very old, so towards the start of the genre. And this is all something that kind of begins in the 1880s and a little bit later. These different genres, as the world is expanding and you're getting global news, people are finding new ways of writing about that and being creative. And sword and fantasy was a major genre at the time that my dad was really interested in. So I'd read all of these like Conan the Barbarian, Lovecraft stories, and Dinotopia is, you could say, like a sister taxa to that. And reading that was my first exposure to the Lost World genre, which is something that we seem to have a lot of nostalgia for in the 90s and 2000s. I mean, we had Dinotopia, but we also had things like the Uncharted video game franchise. We had a resurgence in Indiana Jones, and we had this, like, my favorite, Atlantis the Lost Empire. And as a kid, for me, it
Not
was
to
like,
mention Jurassic Park.
and Jurassic Park, all of these things where we're stumbling across a lost piece of the world that we didn't know was there. An idea that becomes increasingly important as the anxiety of globalization takes hold. I didn't have that sort of knowledge. I was just a small child, and for me it was like, oh, the thing I like. But it also has dinosaurs, and they're wearing cute outfits. What? This is great. Where is the set where I can put them in the little outfits? And that never happened. There's no merchandise for this show, or for this book. And I think that's actually kind of powerful, right? It forced me as a kid to kind of become imaginative in how I engaged with it. And there's so much to engage with.
One of the most standout images is the kind of sauropod caravan, right? Where you get the people riding on the backs of the sauropods. And it's kind of reminiscent of The Lord of the Rings and the way they use the Oliphants as well, but they kind of use them in war there. Whereas I think in Dinotopia, it's more about, only protection, right? Protection from carnivores. But yeah, that the integration, I guess, of these beasts, which we don't often see used in this way with human technologies and human needs, and as a kind of, as I say, integrated society, right? A lot of the dinosaurs, maybe all of them could talk or translate as well. So there was, am I right? Am I misremembering that? Is that right?
No, they had their own language. I'm fairly certain that the dinosaurs could do things like count. My understanding is that when the humans encounter the dinosaurs, there are already some humans living among them because it's like this idea that you found like this cavern that's full of all these creatures. I'm pretty sure the dinosaurs were at least parrot level intelligent, which maybe is not what we think today. You found Dinotopia as a kid as well, or did you find it like, yeah,
Yeah, I distinctly remember sitting in. So I grew up in this very small country town, only about 1,000 people, probably under 1,000 at the time. And I distinctly remember sitting at my primary school reading the Dinotopia books in the library. And as I say, those images have just kind of stuck with me my whole life until I sort of recently went, James Gurney's on Instagram. Let's follow him. And I went to buy the books recently, and unfortunately, he only ships to the US for the signed copies. So I need to get that sorted out. Get someone to forward shipping for me. But yeah, he has these beautiful signed copies as well. So it's just this imagery that has stuck with me my whole life. I think another one that's kind of I mean, it's totally different. I was going to say it's kind of the same, but it's totally different. Actually, it's just that humans and dinosaurs working together kind of is the same theme, but also dressed in outfits. Was a show called Dino Riders, and I don't know if you ever encountered that one, but it was a cartoon in the 90s that had a series of there was often battles and things. So the dinosaurs here were armed up, they had guns, they had weaponry. So it was
I've
like a
seen
very
these toys.
kind of
Yes.
macho, war facing kind of use of dinosaurs there, compared to the much more relatively peaceful environment of Dinotopia and the settlements that were displayed there. But even aside from the dinosaurs, I mentioned Waterfall City. So this is this kind of beautiful Roman style city sitting atop a huge waterfall where the canals flow through the streets and then kind of all pumps out and goes over the waterfall at the end. And so you get these magnificent imagery of just that, right? Just the city it inspires this whole kind of fantasy world. So Gurney's approach to world building is so detailed, but at the same time, okay, not many cities are built at the top of a waterfall, but it feels kind of could be real, like it feels realistic. It doesn't
I think
feel like it's not a floating island kind of thing.
right. I mean, I think one of the things that you get a lot of the time with lost world fiction that is harder to come by in modern media is that it's like this paradise lost situation. So you have this untouched, relatively peaceful civilization, and the violence and conflict that is brought into the setting and the narrative is usually brought in by outsiders. But in this case with Dinotopia, it's this really rare peaceful focus on this sort of world building, which I think is really engaging. There just weren't a lot of things like that when I was a kid. Like you're saying, most of the stuff that had dinosaurs in it was like, whoa, look at this cool monster. And this was like, look at this little gentle fellow that you can pack bagels onto. Look how his horn holds the bagels. Isn't this cute? And it's just so rare to see something like that. And it's so nice. It's just nice to have peaceful storytelling with dinosaurs.
Yeah, I even love that nowadays. And again, people put Jurassic Park down, but one of the best moments in that film for me was the moment they first see the Brachiosaur and they're just overtaken by awe and wonder.
There's It makes me cry every time.
Right. But one of the things about that I really enjoy is there's a couple of games that have come out of that which are park builder simulation games. And I just love building the parks in kind of as naturalistic setting as I could, and then watching the dinosaurs. And so actually on the Fossils and Fiction channel, I've got what I made, which was a kind of trail cam. So I just released as many dinosaurs as I could in a kind of Isla Sauna environment, and then set up a trail cam to watch them for a couple of hours at a time. And so I've got some of these videos just following the creatures in the park or in the game kind of around. And walking around with the camera taking photos is just so fun compared to fighting or running or screaming or dying or whatever happens quite
Yeah.
often.
I think that Dinotopia fed into this thing that I was really obsessed with as a kid, which was putting my Beanie Babies in little outfits. Like I collect stuffed animals of dinosaurs. Every time I go to a museum, I get one. And I used to, as a kid, after reading Dinotopia, I try to dress them up. I try to find like outfits that they could wear and have them interact. Like it It was a form of play with dinosaurs that was, I would say, exclusively nurtured by Dinotopia. But it was always more fun to me than when kids would come up and just try and make them fight. To me, that was always just like, that's a senator. He wouldn't do that.
You're like, come on, he has some dignity.
It's like you don't even know the roles. There's a society here. They have a hierarchy. But yeah, it was just the way that it did the world building. Like I can't think of any other children's books that really did anything equivalent until we started getting like those ology pop-up books. Do you remember those?
No.
I didn't know they were a thing until I moved here and people showed them to me. But there was this series of ologies written by Dugald Steer, and they were like these hyper elaborate lost media style pop-up
Mm-hmm.
books for kids that were a little bit too young for Dinotopia, and they had like trinkets and things that you could take out, and people like things and stuff, so they did quite well. But it wasn't it wasn't trying to tell as cohesive a story as Dinotopia. It had a lot of detail, but the level of detail in individual paintings was just not the same. Yeah, there's just nothing like it. It's
Yeah.
so great.
So, I mean, all the paintings had this really kind of lush 19th century, almost naturalist quality to them, right? They were kind of drawn in softer tones, I guess is one way to look at it. Really textured cities and dramatic lighting, and then kind of drawing some of what it gave that this kind of lived in feel is that he really drew on real world architecture. So, I mentioned Waterfall City, and that had the kind of Roman aqueducts, but there was also these Central American temple style things and sort of Asian pagodas and cathedrals, and each of the cities or settlements within Dinotopia had their own kind of feel to them as well. So, the basic setting was this kind of one island, but it had different regions and environments which felt very similar. And some of the kind of World Heritage items of the Middle East were kind of reflected in the settlements that were in the canyons in Canyon City and all of that kind of stuff as well. So, and then you get the story sold through the perspective of Denison, right? So his sketches and observations and things as well. And so his journey through this world, and the world is lived in, it's realistic. There are other characters and things there, but it feels really dynamic because you're seeing it first person through the eyes of the main character, which is really cool.
Yeah, and wasn't there a dinosaur that you also kind of see the world through? I forget his name. It's like Dixit or something like that. There's like one of the dinosaurs is like not necessarily a perspective character, but you kind of follow him for portions of the story, and that's interesting because you get these like behind the scenes looks at portions of dinosaur society that you otherwise might not get from the human characters. Like I think
Yeah, I
there's a
think you're
scene.
referring to Bix. He's a
Bix,
ceratopsian,
Bix,
a protoceratops.
yes, Bix. He's so cute.
Yeah. So he becomes the traveling partner, the traveling companion of Denison.
That's it. Yes. Because they do like the location, the setting is actually quite large for the amount of work he's put in. And like you say, the locations are so different. The settings that they go through are so varied. And you can, yeah, absolutely see the architecture. I'm looking at pictures of it. And the painting style, I want to say, is borrowed from this like 1930s. I'm thinking about Maxfield Parrish. These like highly detailed but very romanticized colors, very rich textural details, but somewhere that's not quite like that. I'm not thinking Norman Rockwell because that's almost too idealistic. There's still, you can see the clasps on people's robes, you can see like the texture of the fabrics they're wearing, but it still feels like a lived-in world. It's a romanticized, idealized, but lived-in space. It feels very cozy.
It also feels to me a little bit steampunk. So, because you kind of get both ancient technologies merged with kind of futuristic stuff as well. So, he had to figure out power systems, that kind of stuff. And so all of that's in place, but by the same token, it's still kind of older than, this era. Yeah, that is certainly part of it as well. And it's maybe a little bit like agrarian or kind of I don't want to say communist, but kind of it has that kind of flavor to the society where everybody has this role in society and performs their role really well.
Yeah,
Um,
Comrade Bix.
Yeah, we're going to get cancelled over this, if not the rant at the start. But
For agrarian society.
But the kind of point there is that it's a sustainable environment. It's a sustainable kind of setup of society, right? That's kind of not necessarily hierarchical, but everybody finds a place that they can be their best true selves, right? So it's not that you're forced into this place, but you kind of find where you fit the best and then contribute from that position. So yeah, I think that's nice as well.
It's something that seems to be missing from a lot of like modern Lost World takes. Like I'm thinking about like, I mean, it just seems like today in a lot of the media, like Crystal Skull, for example, or maybe things that are, I'm thinking about isekais especially, but I don't want to talk about anime on the podcast because listeners, you don't need to know that I'm a big weeb. You could have guessed that. But there's like this, now it seems like when we encounter lost worlds, they are already lost. And all of this utopian ideology, regardless of what political backing it has, is kind of missing. And I think that's really sad because it's almost as if we've lost this ability to imagine something that functions as well as like Dinotopia might function.
Like things are decaying, right? You discover these environments where things are decaying, or there's an ancient civilization that has disappeared for whatever reason. That's going to be the case in the next Jurassic World film, right? Coming out mid-year. There's a kind of ruined temples environment, which is a bit strange, but it's also in the latest Kong series. The Monsterverse has this kind of Skull Island, has these ancient civilizations that kind of aren't still around anymore. So, yeah, that's right. And whereas Dinotopia really offers it's in the name, but the utopian aspects of that as well.
Yeah. And like, I think what's really interesting as well is that none of this is just told to you. There's very little exposition as exposition. It is all of the storytelling kind of happens through like journal entries and through sketches and scientific observations. So it's like, you feel like you're discovering this world in all of its beautiful detail alongside these adventurers. And to me, it always felt a little bit like the way that we are seeing Dinotopia through these illustrations is how these Victorian gentlemen would have seen it, like very rosy and Greco-Roman in the dressing styles. And I liked that. I liked that element of framing. I thought that was a really cool way to do it.
I also like that they use the dinosaurs in kind of very specific roles. So you get the hadrosaurs working in agriculture and irrigation. You get the sauropods like as the transport, because that seems kind of naturalistic. Who else are you going to load up as a kind of living barge other than a Brachiosaurus?
Yeah.
And at the same time, you get the carnivores there, but they're kind of like, they're not villains. They're just there as part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So even they have their roles.
And I think that, I mean, if dinosaurs were still alive, yes, we would put them in a theme park. Yes, they totally would eat people, and we would think that that is NASCAR levels of engaging. But come on, people would 100% have them as pets. They would definitely use them as a novelty for like pulling carts or riding around town instead of a horse. But I like, one of the really cool elements that I liked was the way that pterosaurs get utilized, because that reminded me so much of like, I guess one of the spiritual predecessors to this would have been like Dragon Riders of Pern. Does anyone remember Dragon Riders of Pern?
Yeah, no, I do.
Yeah, and that was a series that kind of had similar leanings. Like, okay, well, there are dragons, but they're also animals, and we do interact with them like they're animals some of the time. How to Train Your Dragon fans, that's another like inspiration for your series. But that felt to me very inspired by that choice, because you have these giant pterosaurs that they ride around like they're big mounts, and it's just so iconic. Like, who wouldn't do that? I would do that right now if you gave me the option.
To ride a pterosaur to work, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adele would be the one training them. In my head, she's like captain of the pterosaurs.
Adele Pentland, captain of the pterosaurs. I think we need that as a piece of fan art now.
Absolutely. I think she should be given like a t-shirt that says that. Just in case it ever comes true, then people will be able to identify her immediately.
Anybody needs some pterosaurs trained, go and see Adele.
How to Train Your Pterosaur.
This is fantastic. I feel like we just come up with so many good ideas here that we just need other people to take some of them up. We can't do everything ourselves.
We need like rich benefactor that can sponsor an artist for our podcast like a Renaissance painter.
Yeah. Yeah, we need an artist in residence who's just paid just to come up with the good ideas that we that we talk about.
Step 1, get money. Step 2, hire Zev for everything.
Yeah, Zev. Exactly. Of course. I mean, speaking of Zev's art, I know we're in the middle of this discussion as opposed to, but today I'm wearing the shirt that features Zev's art with our little mascots on it. So
It's so good.
they are available on our shop now.
You should all immediately go buy the Skitters beanie. He looks so good. It is the most appropriate piece of clothing for all your occasions. At any point, you may need to tell someone you love trilobites, and there you go. That's a perfect accoutrement.
With the Australian winter coming up pretty rapidly, I think it's worth getting the order in for the beanies.
Like, I can't even write a grant application to ask for money for myself, but here I am just being like, please give us money for this t-shirt, because it's the t-shirt that's cool. That to me feels okay. So speaking of kind of like other franchises and things like that, I think there are a couple that like the Dinotopia kind of gets compared to, and none of them scratch the same itch, but it's kind of worth, I think, going over like a couple of the different ones that through time have been adjacent to it.
Go for it. What
For
do you
example, like Land Before Time. Wow, I was very obsessed with that as a kid. Like everyone says Jurassic Park, but I think Land Before Time sits in like a slightly older brain cell just behind it. It's harder, I think, now to say that that's what got you into it, because it's not an exciting movie about paleontologists. It's kind of a sad story about a kid that lost his mom, but it's so beautiful, good. It's so pretty, and the work that was put into it. Like this is an early James Bluth, David Bluth. I think one of them is the right name.
Bluth, yeah. Don Bluth.
Bluth.
Don.
Not George Michael. There's always money in the Land Before Time stand.
I had an episode about the Land Before Time, I want to say 18 months ago now. And that was a really great conversation where we got into some of those comparisons with the Land Before Time and other later films like Jurassic Park. But Spielberg actually was attached to the Land Before Time as well. And I think there's some instances where it's almost a one for one, where he kind of realized, or Bluth realized a shot in the Land Before Time that Spielberg drew on or had a motif to in Jurassic Park. So one that I can think of is when there's a moment where the sharp tooth is coming after the kids, after Littlefoot and Sarah, I think, and pushing down on this branch from above. So they're hiding below this branch, and he's pushing down. And you can put that next to the shot of Lex and Tim in the car with the Rex coming through the ceiling of the car, and it's exactly the same. Like it looks exactly the same.
But this is why it's so important to have people who are interested in art encouraged to kind of interact with these media, because and I think it's a natural urge for a lot of them as well. Artists are just like us. They also want to see a big, cool animal. But like, I think it's just this recursion where you get these artistic and loving and very cool depictions of dinosaurs by people with a more artistic sense that get picked up on and reiterated on by people whose sensibilities might be more how to make a really fun movie, how to make a very emotionally moving scene. It's just very cool to see it carry on. That's really, I'm picturing it and I can see it now, but if you'd never told me, I don't think I would have put it together.
Yeah, it was only when I was rewatching The Land Before Time for that conversation that I kind of made the connection, and I went, wow, I hadn't noticed it before that either, but you know, it was just stark. And there's a couple of other moments which I talk about in that conversation too. So yeah, I mean, The Land Before Time was Jurassic Park before Jurassic Park. I mean, so was The Lost World, and so was King Kong. Like they all kind of had their moment and fed forward into what became Jurassic Park, but also, and similarly, I guess, you know, Dinotopia draws on a lot of references and then has fed forward into maybe some of these other. I mean, who knows? Maybe the people doing the kind of lost civilization stuff in the newest Jurassic World are getting that from Dinotopia.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting, isn't it? Like during the Great Westward Push in America, for instance, there was this strongly held belief by, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, that as they pushed west, Lewis and Clark would find all of these animals like the North American lion that they were finding fossils of in caves in Kentucky. Like, this idea was really strongly held for a very long time that there were undiscovered pockets of the world, and those pockets would be full of dangerous and amusing creatures of great size. And I think that's just, it's a very noble human belief in a lot of ways. Like, I do think there's something innately curious about us, and I think that's something that has been at the heart of all these lost world media that is good. Like, the bad lost world, lost civilization media immediately follows that thought with, and we're so much better than them. And it's like, nope, 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 nope. Dinotopia, not like that. But it's just, I think if you draw a line from that kind of like, maybe there are undiscovered pockets to Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World and a lot of these fiction stories that are hypothesizing what are in these pockets to Dinotopia, there's a lot of optimism in that, a lot of really beautiful optimism.
Beautiful optimism, I think, is really nice. There's a line that stands out for Dinotopia for me, which is talking about the need to eat to live, don't live to eat. And that goes back to that kind of living in harmony, a kind of utopian ideal of everybody finding their place and not taking more than they need.
And it's something that I feel, I mean, if we think about these earlier iterations, these are people whose understanding of our natural world was so fundamentally different. And revisiting these kinds of stories in the 90s, when our understanding of dinosaurs as animals was finally coming to, I mean, I think Dinosaur Heresies would have been published. Dinosaur Heresies was the book that really inspired parts of Jurassic Park. It was this reimagining of dinosaurs as animals that were warm-blooded, among other things. So in 1986, this book comes out. It imagines dinosaurs as fast, able to participate in like herd behavior. Like, these are animals with complex behaviors. And this is something that's missing from like those old black and white interpretations of the Lost World. These are just slow, plodding, dumb lizards. And then you get something like Dinotopia that has that more scientific understanding, and it brings them to life in this totally unique way.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think, and so this is where we see the feeding of, we often talk about the connections between science and literature. And sometimes it's hard to shake, unless they're referring to a specific species that only one person's described and they're giving it certain characteristics that only one person's described. If you have these general ideas filtering out from the science, from the research, then people who are trying to write about these creatures in whatever form they're trying to do that, whether they're trying to put them on film or they're trying to put them into kids' books, will hopefully find that information and use it accurately, right? And if they don't, it doesn't necessarily mean they failed either, because sometimes things have to fit the story. I think we can even talk about our own little trilobite here in this regard, because his eyes are on the wrong side of the head.
Yes, yeah, and it's like you can be a pedant to some extent with the kind of shapes of the midsection and the way that the pleural spines work. I mean, but if we had made a completely accurate Skitters, he would not be nearly as cute. So it was a case of me and Zev having several conversations, kind of deciding what looked good to an audience and also still looked distinctly like that animal. And that's something Zev emphasizes a lot in his workshop that we ran as part of a student conference last year, was this idea that when you are making something that is for a general audience, you have to balance both the accuracy of the thing you're making so that it's still recognizable as that thing, and presenting it in a way that's going to make your audience have an emotional connection to it. And I think that is very difficult with animals that are not inherently like us. And I think that a lot of people with dinosaurs choose to just kind of lean into, this is a big, scary, dumb monster. Grawr, isn't it cool? But that's not always, you don't have to do that. I think this offers a really cool view of dinosaurs as like maybe more intelligent than they even actually are. I mean, they're librarians and teachers, and they have a writing system. That's obviously not something we see evidence for in the fossil record. And my friends have shown me pictures of how big their brains would be, and it's like, oh no.
But it's exactly right that you get these opportunities to kind of blend realism with storytelling and so you get science and stories partnering together. And I think that's beautiful. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do here in fossils and fiction, really.
Yeah, and it's also the case that as science is progressing, we're understanding more and more that brain size has very little to do with, for example, behavior, pain, perceptions. We think that, like insects now, the go for most insect studiers is that they are capable of having fear responses. They're capable of having pain responses. They will avoid stimuli and things like that. Bees can play soccer. Who knows what dinosaurs could do with their itty bitty brains? Maybe it's more than we think right now. It's nice to inhabit a universe where that's at least possible, just for a bit.
And I guess the other thing to emphasize is that regardless of kind of perceived intelligence, which is always going to revolve around human conceptions of intelligence,
Indeed.
these are always still animals that have their own kind of right to exist. Obviously, dinosaurs, weren't removed by our hand, but in general, animals have a right to exist that's inherent to them, regardless of a perceived human likeness or not.
That's exactly it. Like, there are components to this society in Dinotopia that are just for dinosaurs. And I think that's, I mean, parts of the city that aren't even accessible to human beings because they're meant for dinosaurs that are incredibly long necked or can fly. And that's really cool. I think that's a really interesting component. And it feeds into this, like, coexistence, peaceful, mindful, open minded approach that seems to be kind of one of the core philosophies when we think about Dinotopia.
But also, yeah, adapting, right, too, and being adaptive to the people around you and making sure that they're also supported and looked after in whatever ways they need to be.
I mean, it's in the name, right? Dinotopia is a utopia. That's kind of fun. One of the cool things is that we can then compare it to these other settings that take on similar ideas of, like, well, in an ideal world, what would things be like? And I can't think of too many that are also set in Lost World settings. I think Laputa is one, but Laputa is actually based on an older story called Gulliver's Travels. I forget who by. Some very old dead man. But it's this person kind of tumbling through these different worlds and exploring them. People of unusual size. They're either very large or very small, and just kind of seeing what those societies would look like. But then, most of the other examples that you would kind of think about would be things more like Star Trek, I suppose.
Yeah, which is a kind of aspirational utopia rather than, yeah, so it's like we might be able to achieve this at some point in the future rather than a kind of purely fantastical one. So obviously it's fantasy, but it's as I say, aspirational because it's kind of grounded in a more real history. I think as well, utopias are important sometimes because, particularly when things are pretty dark, dystopia can sometimes. And don't get me wrong, I love dystopia. I'm a huge cyberpunk fan and sci-fi fan, and that's kind of full of dystopias. But I think sometimes it can be too bleak as well, and it's nice to just have these fictional worlds where things are just nice, actually, where things are in harmony.
Especially now, I think it's incredibly important to maintain an idea in our own hearts and heads of what we would like society to look like, because there is so much conflict and there are a lot of dystopian series that are popular. It reflects a real feeling that many people are having, right? I mean, we are worried, we're scared, but having something to look forward to is also so important. Just challenging yourself to imagine what that society would look like and how you would act within it can be a great piece of moral guidance in how you approach, for example, how you educate people or how you interact with the people in your community. Make dinosaurs part of your community is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And if not non-avian dinosaurs, then at least the avian ones. We can
That's
look after
it.
them to start.
That's it. Feed a local magpie.
A little bit of a fantasy thinking for you now. If Dinotopia were written today, how might it change some 30 years on?
Well, I'm interested to hear what our listeners think about that as well, because they'll be a lot more versed in the dinosaur science, I think. But for me, I think one of the big changes would be how much our own understanding of dinosaurs has changed. The feathers, the new kinds of dinosaurs. I would love to see how, for example, a modern Spinosaurus would fit into this narrative. Mostly because people would get in a lot of fights about its reconstruction. But Yeah, I think we know so much more about the world and about the dinosaurs that we had that I think there would be so many new opportunities to bring that information in and make the environment even more rich and detailed. What about you? What do you think would be different?
Well, see, I would tend to go for the other side of things and say that I think if someone was to write Dinotopia today, they would have to. I guess in the 90s there was still a bit of plausible. Maybe there's an island out there that we don't know, right?
Mm.
Even to that point. But nowadays, with kind of global satellite mapping of the entire planet, we can't really say that. So I think there would have to be a kind of plausible reason for why the island would have remained hidden that would have to be explained, and so that would be something that would be kind of more detailed if it was written today, would be my take.
Yeah, maybe something like alternate worlds, like you've slipped into an alternate reality where this is possible. Or I think you either would need to do that or you would need to do something like the Underworld franchise where it's like it's real and it's here, but it's been hidden from normal people in society by this conspiratorial group for yonks and yonks.
Hmm.
I feel like that's not very Dinotopia. I feel like that's a little bit too dark.
Well, I mean, there's, Jules Verne's as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is kind of that, right? And not to mention Hollow Earth in the kind of MonsterVerse series, which, that's gone right there. So that Earth kind of is doubled inside itself, which is, yeah, not logical, but I guess it's an option.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and like I guess there are things like Dinotopia today. Can you think of any particularly good examples for people that might want to read some, like, I'm assuming that our listeners out there, if you haven't already, please grab a copy of Dinotopia. It doesn't have to be signed, but if you live in the US, now's a great time to get one. Have a read. I'm assuming a lot of you are also longtime fans. There's a lot of Dinotopia to be consumed. There are quite a few illustrated books, and there are some video games. There's a TV series.
See, I would kind of love a documentary style approach to it. Like you go prehistoric planet style, but we've found Dinotopia and here's a documentary about it rather than like a kind of adventure.
Gosh, and could you imagine David Attenborough narrating that as well? Oh my gosh. I would just throw money at it. So I guess
That would
Prehistoric
be
Planet is like a good, if you liked Dinotopia, that's a good thing to go watch. It's inspired by it, I would say, in some ways.
Yeah, Prehistoric Planet is so fantastic. It's such fun. Alyssa, thank you for revisiting Dinotopia with me and reliving some millennial nostalgia.
Absolutely. Thank you for not letting me yap for absolute centuries about it. This is so much fun.
To support the podcasts you spend time with, like this one, go to Lenny FM. That's Lenny, LENNY.FM.
Now that we're done revisiting one of our favorite pieces of nostalgia, it's time to look forward to some things that are exciting in our world today. Last episode, we asked listeners to shout out some of their favorite small museums and local national parks, scaled-sized national parks, places you can go visit right now that might be small but in your community that are worth a visit and a stopover. I'll start with some of the Instagram comments that we got from people with recommendations, and then we will slide on over to the TikTok comments. So one of the first comments we got was from the Dinosaur Podcast, which recommended the Whiteside Museum in Seymour, Texas, as well as the Bishop Science Collective in Florida, which has a manatee rehabilitation program. How cute is that?
How beautiful.
And a Yorkshire Natural History Museum, which is in the old UK, that has a really ambitious program. So shout out to all three of those locations, the Whiteside Museum, Bishop Science Center, and Yorkshire Natural History Museum.
And that's Jimmy Waldron again recommending those. Thanks,
Jimmy
Jimmy.
Waldron, excellent, yes. And go check out his podcast if you haven't. And we also have James Pascoe recommending, of course, the Lyme Regis Museum, which is also in the UK. I believe that's in Dorset. If you've listened to the episode with Saskia, you already know why this is a fabulous place that you should go check out. We also have Dinosaur Fossil Fashion. That is Mason, who is recommending Kronosaurus Corner. That's an Aussie favorite. That is in, I want to say Queensland.
It's in... Is it in Richmond, Queensland?
I believe so. Kronosaurus. It's a lovely way to check out some of the inland sea fauna that would have existed in Australia during the time of the dinosaurs. It is located in Richmond, Australia. Very good. You would do well at trivia. Yeah, so if you're ever going on a little road trip through Queensland, that's a great stopover to make. The mascot is absolutely precious, and I have word that some new art and displays might be coming to Kronosaurus Corner in the next couple of years.
Well, there's a little hint. The reason I know it's in Richmond is from my multiple conversations with Adele and about her work associated with Kronosaurus Corner, as well as, of course, the Australian Age of Dinosaurs in Winton, which is just down the road by Queensland standards. So if you're doing a road trip, you'll need to visit both of those.
So there's two more, just really, really quick, from Patrick Townsend. It's the Kirk Latham Museum in the Yorkshire Coast and the Wild West Dino Discovery Small Touring Exhibition, which is in the UK.
Over on TikTok, we had Macallosaurus recommend to us Burpee Museum in Rockford, Illinois, which sounds like a cool one. The Pooseum in Williams, Arizona. So this is a coprolite museum in Williams, Arizona. And why not? That was recommended by the Pooseum. So thanks for jumping on, guys, and self-recommending. That's totally fine. We had another user by the username of 13 recommends Sir John Soane's Museum in London. And the comment says, absolutely fantastic. And he paid for what's in there. He didn't steal it, which is a nice little jab at some of the other natural history and history museums and various other museums that are out there. We had another user by the name of Dream Mum recommend the Canadian Fossil Discovery Centre in Morden, Manitoba in Canada. And another Canadian recommendation came from Kayla C. Falconer, which was the Gopher Hole Museum in Torrington, Canada, in Alberta. So nice little spread around the world there. We've got some American, some Australian, some UK, and some Canadian recommendations. I'd love to hear any others out there if people have recommendations for their favourite small museums. But yeah, thanks to everyone who recommended some.
Yeah, if you have any more small museums that you'd like to recommend to us, or this is just my personal ask, if you have any media that gives you the same feeling as Dinotopia, something that you'd recommend for those of us who we're desperate and hungry for more of that, please feel free to leave a comment, and so I can go to my local bookstore.
And not only that, of course, if anyone wants to make some artwork of Adele as the pterosaur captain, we would love to see that as well.
I personally would just love to see that in real life as well. Like, she would be amazing at that job.
Yeah, of course. She's worked her whole life for it, just like Alan Grant in Jurassic Park.
Oh my gosh. On a Pharaoh Draco, like the Iron Dragon lady, oh my god.
We're getting into Game of Thrones territory there.
I'd hope she'd be a fair and just ruler and let me live, because we know each other, and hopefully that means that I will be spared.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers
crossed. This has
crossed.
been a great episode. Thanks so much for all the fun. We've got more interviews lined up and coming soon. Lots more episodes. We'll try and get them out roughly on a fortnightly basis. Sometimes there'll be a little bit of a slip, but thanks for the chat and thanks for listening.
Yes, tune in next time and we'll see you then. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Fossils and Fiction. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to rate, review, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform.
And don't forget to connect with us on social media. Share your fossil-inspired stories, art, or questions. We'd love to feature you in an upcoming episode. Until next time, keep exploring the culture and science of paleontology.